Hey, how's it going, guys? I have a pretty special announcement. Tomorrow, or technically today, is the 4th of July, and I have made a special sale on the Liberal tier mugs. Through the 4th of July, there will be a 40% discount code on Liberal tier mugs, so be sure to go ahead and check them out. If you're ever going to get one, now's the chance. First link in the description. Thank you guys for watching the video. Let's get right to it.
Hi, Ben. Thanks for tweeting me the other day. I literally cried. And true story. And secondly, do you believe that we have a wage gap, like a current wage gap?
Between men and women?
Yeah.
Okay, so there is no wage gap between men and women for women who are straight out of college and are single and do not have kids. The wage gap not only does not exist, there is, if anything, a reverse wage gap. So according to a study quoted in Time magazine in 2010, women are earning 8% more than men in 50 major cities across the United States, on average coming straight out of college. The truth is that women take more time off from work. They take different jobs than men. A lot of high-paying jobs for men involve men going into really dangerous places and doing really dangerous things that women either don't want to do or aren't physically qualified to do. I mean, I'm sorry to break it to the left, but it turns out that on average, women are not as strong as men. So, they're going to be more male firemen than fire women, just as a general rule. When it comes to the reality is that the wage gap it entirely disappears once you factor out the types of jobs that are being done, the amount of time in the workforce, the amount of time taken off, the number of hours worked. My wife, again, not to use her as an example for everything, my wife's a perfect example of this. She took off a year between her residency, between med school and residency. Between second and third year of medical school. She took off a year to take care of our first baby, and then she took off a few months after she had our second baby, before she went back to residency. I took off a week both times. And that's not because I'm so strong and tough or because she's so weak and fragile. She's really tough. It's because my wife wanted to spend time with our kids, and that was her choice, and thank God we were able to make that happen. So that's not, that is not a rip on women at all. In fact, I think it's glorious that so many women want to take time out to do the most important thing that any human being can do, which is raise their children.
Florida. Vicki, you're on C-SPAN, Spook TV.
Now, Ben, I've read several of your works. I've heard you speak at David Horowitz's group out in Los Angeles one time. At any rate, I'm calling for two things. One, I'm a former Republican. I am so fed up with the party and the politics. I wanted to ask you, are we still able to grab defeat out of the jaws of victory this time around? Are we going to foul it up again? And then secondly, I wanted to say we do need to recommend Friedman's book, Freedom to Choose. That's a great book about freedom of choice. And also I want to mention, talking about civil rights, that Barry Goldwater refused to sign the civil rights legislation because he felt it deprived people of their freedom to associate with those with whom they wanted to associate, which kind of reflects back on this gay marriage thing. At any rate, are we Republicans going to lose?
Say, Vicki, before we get an answer from Ben Shapiro, when you say you're afraid the Republicans are going to screw it up again in 2016, can you give an example of what you mean?
Yes, unfortunately, as a former Republican, I broke my back for John McCain going door to door down here in Florida, and then also for Mitt Romney, and they were such lovely gentlemen, but they ran campaigns. They just could not communicate with the American people on the level that they needed to. And I'm afraid this will happen again because we have such lovely people running, or who look like they're going to be running on the Republican ticket. We just can't be as sharp as the Democrats, it seems, and I'm not sure why. What's the solution?
Ben Shapiro.
Well, I think the solution is getting down to actual basic moral arguments. The left, when I talk about how the left bullies and when they say you're a bad person if you disagree with them, that's because the left, deep down in their heart, they believe that they are morally superior. And I believe that that's an unbased moral superiority. It's unfounded. It's an unearned moral superiority. But the truth is that any religious perspective you take, any political perspective you take, in essence, at your very root, you're probably going to feel like you have a certain level of moral superiority for holding those beliefs. I believe conservatism to be a morally superior belief system to leftism, and if people on the right aren't able to articulate that, then that's going to continue to be a serious problem for them. As far as the Republican Party and are they actually going to be able to do any damage here, I think that the fact is that the Republican Senate has been less than useful thus far. What they just did in passing a bill that basically allows President Obama to loosen sanctions on Iran is truly egregious. It was played by the press as though it was a rebuke to President Obama. Far from it. That bill basically allows President Obama to loosen sanctions on Iran unless Republicans can come up with 67 votes in the Senate to stop him. That's going to be a very uphill battle. As far as the Republican nominees, I think there are some who have started to learn about speaking moral language, speaking about the language of rights, speaking in very basic and meaningful terms that people actually resonate to. But unless they can speak in those moral terms on a routine basis, then if they're going to do what Mitt Romney did and trot out 57-point tax plans and talk about everybody's effective marginal tax rate, okay, I happen to know my effective marginal tax rate because I just had to sign a big check to the IRS because of it. But most people actually don't know their effective marginal tax rate. So if that's your pitch for President of the United States, which by the way was Romney's pitch, that if your effective marginal tax rate for the highest tax bracket is 35.7 as opposed to 34.2, you're going to cripple the economy. I'm sorry, that's not very much of a pitch for you to be President of the United States.
Next book. What is it?
Well, actually, I'm working on a novel right now, which should be kind of fun. I just felt like changing it up a little bit. So I'm working on kind of a, as most conservatives are at this point, a post-apocalyptic American novel. Right? I mean, I think most Americans are thinking along those lines as we buy our canned food and shotgun shells. So I'm writing something along those lines, and it's a lot of fun to write. And then I've been thinking along the lines of a couple of different topics that I think would be interesting to write about. And one would be the kind of creeping tyranny of the American mind, this move toward, I disagree with you, therefore I get to use the government to do whatever it is that I want to do. And that's truly frightening to me, because there are plenty of things that I disagree with. I mean, as you can tell, there are plenty of things that I find distasteful and problematic and disagreeable. There are people who do things every day that I find gross and terrible. But I don't think that gives me the ability or the right to use the government as a cram-down mechanism on them, forcing them to do what I want. And I think that unless Americans return to that vision of government, that government is really only there to prevent externalities of interpersonal actions. It's there to protect third parties. Then we're going to get ourselves into a lot of trouble. Now, I know that's a pretty libertarian perspective, but I think that we're becoming such a country of divided lifestyles that it's going to be difficult for us to even remain one country in the long run unless we come to an agreement that government is going to have to stay out of it, and we're going to have to just deal with each other on an interpersonal level and let social movements deal with the rest. If you want to live in a religious community, live in a religious community, but it's nobody else's business what kind of community you live in. And same thing if you live in an atheist community, if you live in a gay community, if you live in a Christian community, you should be basically allowed to be left alone. And we all have the freedom of movement. We're all allowed to choose where we live and under what lifestyle we wish to live. And the fact that we've decided on a national level, and it's happened both right and left, unfortunately, that the federal government can be, it's the one ring, that you can use that power and you can wield that power. Nobody can wield that power properly. I mean, this is why the marriage debate is so fascinating, because when it comes to same-sex marriage, what the right has to acknowledge is that the government tried to forward traditional marriage and failed. I mean, the government's attempts to forward traditional marriage were a complete failure, which is why for years I've been advocating that the government just get completely out of the business of marriage, because it's not like the government did any good for traditional marriage in the first place. Get the government completely out of it. Let people actually have interpersonal contractual relationships with one another, is what I have with my wife. I mean, we have we have a ketubah, right? I mean, we have a ketubah, which is a Jewish marital document.
Ketubah?
Yeah, it's ketubah. We have a Jewish marital document, and then we also have our state marital document. I don't care about our state marital document. It makes no difference to me. It's just something I had to register with the government. The ketubah is hanging on the wall in our house, as it is in most Jewish households. That was the way that the Jews registered marriage 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, and there's nothing wrong with it today. The idea that I get to make an agreement with this one person, how we are going to live our lives, that seems to me a better system than having the government decide what's an appropriate relationship and what is not an appropriate relationship in a consensual situation that doesn't affect others.
Jim is in Caliente, California. Jim, you're on Book TV with Ben Shapiro. Jim, are you with us? Tell you what, Jim is gone. All right, let's move on to Taylor in Dover, Delaware. Taylor, please go ahead with your question or comment.
Yes, I have a couple of questions for him. One is on a personal level. I just wanted to know if he's ever served in the military or anyone in his family has ever served in the military. I would also like to know if he's so hell-bent, basically, on destroying the federal government, what government would he think that we would need to have in order for us to stay United States of America? And the other question is, I don't understand the Republican Party right now because a lot of their policies are coming from the Ayn Rand Institute, which is based on objectivism, and which is basically, the most non-religious, she was an atheist to begin with, and it's like the Republican Party just worships her, especially Paul Ryan, who gives her book to everyone, and so that's
all right. We got that. Tell you what, Taylor, why did you ask the first question about the military?
Because I get sick and tired of all these people that are pro-military. My dad was shot down, or not shot down, but survived 2 plane crashes in World War II. My husband was in Vietnam and got Agent Orange exposure, and he died very prematurely because of that. And I worked for the United States government for 30 years, and all these people that have never served their government, have never served in the military, they are always gung-ho military, and they do not, it's like they have never served in the military. And like right now, we need the draft.
All right, we've got the point. I appreciate that, and the draft. We'll add that to the list. Ben Shapiro.
Okay, so a couple of things. First of all, I loved your rendition of "Shake It Off." Second of all, as far as your questions about military service, thank you for your family's military service, obviously, as well as your husband's military service. You asked me why I want to destroy the federal government, and then you also asked me why I want to bulk up the military. Those two are in complete opposition. So obviously, I don't want to destroy the federal government. I want to restrict the federal government to the tasks for which it was originally designed, including national security and military defense. As far as the argument, the chicken hawk argument, which is essentially what that argument is, that I didn't serve in the military, therefore I can't be a hawk. Number one, I am not a member of the police force. I still get to vote on police policy. Second of all, when it comes to who defines military policy, hey, folks on the left, I will make you a deal right now. I will never speak again about military policy if we all agree that the members of the military get to vote on military policy. You happy with that? You think that's going to go well for you? I have a feeling that's going to go very poorly for you because it turns out that the members of the military vote disproportionately Republican and agree with me on national defense and national security. As far as the Ayn Rand question, objectivism, what Republicans like about objectivism is that it points out the evils of collectivism. That's really what they like about objectivism. As far as Ayn Rand's personal philosophy, the atheistic notion that selfishness is the ultimate value, I think that most Republicans actually don't agree with that. I think they like her description of capitalism in some ways. I think they love her description of collectivism. But if you ask most Republicans, do they believe in thoroughgoing objectivism, the answer is absolutely not. The vast majority of Republicans do not believe in thoroughgoing objectivism, which is why the vast majority of Republicans are actually religious.
Jocelyn is right here in Los Angeles. Please go ahead, Jocelyn.
Yes, I would like to ask Ben Shapiro, why is he so focused on the Obama administration with regards to privacy and the lack thereof, when this issue was really accelerated with Bush and the Cheney administration? And now that President Obama is in office, it is a big deal. Shouldn't his title read The People versus Bush and Cheney?
Okay, as far as the privacy question, I actually call for prosecution in the book of people who were involved in the surveillance programs under Bush and Cheney. So actually, you sort of make my case. The fact is that I don't restrict it to Barack Obama. When rights are violated, rights are violated. The fact is that the Obama administration did dramatically upscale the amount of surveillance, which is kind of fascinating in light of the fact that the Obama administration has declared the war on terror basically in wind-down mode. It's supposed to be ending, so why exactly are we ratcheting up the amount of information about Americans that we are currently gathering? That seems to be internally contradictory. At least Bush and Cheney were trying to give us an excuse. They were saying that we had a war on terror and we were trying to ferret out the folks who were dangerous. The Obama administration refuses to even acknowledge that folks are dangerous. I mean, we're in the middle of signing a nuclear deal with Iran, even as the Iranian Revolutionary Guard today said that they will not allow any inspections of nuclear facilities. So when you
Hey, how's it going, guys? I have a pretty special announcement. Tomorrow, or technically today, is the 4th of July, and I have made a special sale on the Liberal tier mugs. Through the 4th of July, there will be a 40% discount code on Liberal tier mugs, so be sure to go ahead and check them out. If you're ever going to get one, now's the chance. Firstly,
the truth is that women take more time off from work. They take different jobs than men. A lot of high-paying jobs for men involve men going into really dangerous places and doing really dangerous things that women either don't want to do or aren't physically qualified to do. I mean, I'm sorry to break it to the left, but it turns out that on average, women are not as strong as men. So, there are going to be more male firemen than firewomen, just as a general rule. When it comes to the reality is that the wage gap it entirely disappears once you factor out the types of jobs that are being done, the amount of time in the workforce, the amount of time taken off, the number of hours worked. My wife, again, not to use her as an example for everything, my wife's a perfect example of this. She took off
for women who are straight out of college and are single and do not have kids. The wage gap not only does not exist, there is, if anything, a reverse wage gap. So according to a study quoted in Time magazine in 2010, women are earning 8% more than men in 50 major cities across the United States on average coming straight out of college.
In the description. Thank you guys for watching the video. Let's get right to it.
Hi, Ben. Thanks for tweeting me the other day. I literally cried. And true story. And secondly, do you believe that we have a wage gap, like a current wage gap?
Between men and women?
Yeah.
Okay, so there is no wage gap between men and women